In this video, we will create a user provider. This is the component that will hold the user object and the flag if whether the user is authenticated or not, and it will provide it to the whole application. For this user provider component, to be able to provide the user object or the authenticated flag to the whole application, it should be high in the root of the application. So let's create here the user provided component. So far this component doesn't exist, but we will create it soon. So here we have a user provider component that wraps all the other components in the application. This component has only the view and the children. Children is the special property that means all the components that I pass to this component. So the children will be the navigation component right now. And now let's think, how would we like to store the data, meaning the user object and the authenticated flag. This should be accessible globally. From the past we know that there are several types of data storage in the React. Component state is local to the components and context is global to all the components. You can read more about the context in React from the documentation. And you can see the context is designed to share the data that can be considered global for a tree of React components. This is precisely what we need. Let's define the context structure. We will have the user object, so far null, we don't know the structure yet, and we will have the flag is authenticated that will indicate whether the user is authenticated or not. We will use it across the application to show the first state for the case when the user is authenticated and for the case where the user is not authenticated. Now we should create the context using the createContext method. We will create the context of the same name as a type, and it will be of type UserContext. As an argument to this method, we can add an initial value, the default value that will be used once the context is initialized. Like this, we say that when the context is initialized, we will have isAuthenticated set to false and the user to null. Now we will change the view component to the user provider component. And provider that is responsible to passing user context to whole application. Provider also needs to have some values passed. So let's create the local state for this component. and pass those to the provider values. So to recapitulate, we have a user context. This is an object, the type of the object that will be passing to the whole application to use. We have initial values. This is predefined values, default values for the user context that will be passing. So once the application initializes, our object will have these values. User null and is authenticated false. We have created the context. This is actual object that will be passed to the whole application with the initial values. And we define the user provider component that wraps all the other components, as you can see here, and passes this context through these values. In the next video, we will see how to use this context in other components, and also we will see how to fill the values in here.